Hi, welcome to Tea with Mali. Today we have Bryan Ramos with Zatori. He is the founder and the organizational architect. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Mali, for having me today.
Thank you. So today I want to focus on this journey called entrepreneurship, right? Because I think there's a lot of people who are buzzing about it out there in media. What is this whole concept of entrepreneurship? What's it all about? Many years ago, it was kind of like if you're an entrepreneur, it's kind of this bizarre thing and high risk takers. And now everybody's talking about being an entrepreneur. So I'd love to learn more about your journey. How did you decide? What's your background to kind of take that plunge into entrepreneurship?
I think it actually started when I was a kid, and in junior high school specifically, my mother would buy packs of bubble gum, the multi-packs of bubble gum. I would take them apart and then sell them per piece at 25 cents a piece. And I think that's where my journey to be an entrepreneur really started. Just as this passion for, at the time it was selling gum to kids, but it made people happy. So I realized that I had the ability to provide people with something that would bring them joy. And I think growing up, it didn't stop there. I used to always think about creating things and figuring out ways of selling it. But then my journey shifted a bit really. In my teens, I really started to think about how do I put together all of my core passions as a child, which were art. I loved Legos, I loved computers, and architecture at the time seemed like the right fit for me. So I actually ended up going to University of Maryland when I graduated high school, got into their architectural program. A few years later, then transferred to Catholic University and wrapped up my undergraduate degree in architecture. I went and worked at an architecture firm for about a year or two. And interestingly enough, one day I'm sitting at my job, and do you remember when the movie The Matrix came out? Yeah. Well, something about that movie got me thinking, is there just something bigger? Is there something more? Am I missing something? And I started to just feel that maybe what I was doing was not the right thing for me. And one day I'm sitting at my desk and I look to my right and there's a stack of boxes with the word Matrix written on them. And I felt, oh my God, I'm in the Matrix. This isn't, I'm being controlled here. So I actually just had this feeling like something was controlling me. And that moment I actually made the decision not to continue on in my architectural career. However, I was signed up to go back to grad school for architecture. So I thought through that and I figured what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to grad school, not with the intent of being an architect anymore, but really with the intent of enjoying the experience. And I think going back really quickly here to what entrepreneurship is, I think entrepreneurship is a non-linear journey. And you just have to be open to what comes up and just kind of go with it. And what happened was I went back to Catholic University and got my master's in architecture, and I really loved the experience because it wasn't so much tied to outcomes anymore. I wasn't saying I'm going to be an architect, I'm going to do this. I was just like, I'm going to really get into this. And what I learned during that time was really, I had this great professor who taught me the mechanics of taking a vision. So that's what architects do. They take an idea, a concept, an emotion, and how do you translate that into something that people can build? So that process really got ingrained into me at that time. How do you take a vision? How do you create a blueprint? How do you create something to make that vision real?
Right.
And that's a lot of what entrepreneurship is, right? You've got this something, this idea that something's out there and it needs to be created. But then you are tasked with figuring out the blueprint, the mechanics, how do you make it real? So with that, I had gotten engaged right around the same time, actually at the end of 1999. And I'm about to wrap up graduate school in 2001. And my fiance at the time asks me, so what are you doing in terms of a job? Or, you know, we're getting married here and you're still living in your parents' basement. And I started to think about that. And I actually said a simple prayer at the time. I just prayed that I needed a job. I was like, something's got to come up. And sure enough, I met an individual that I would ultimately go to work for a few months later in Ashburn, Virginia. And at the time, he and his brother had set up a high-tech product development company. They started off as a manufacturing firm and then evolved into engineering, and then they combined the two. So somehow I fell into high-tech product development and engineering. one of the owners had spent 15 years at Marriott. He was the next Marriott executive, and he was an architect as well. So him and I really just had a good connection from day one. And what he did for me was he would show me how running and growing an organization was really like architecture. You had an idea, you had to create a blueprint, you had to make things happen. So I spent 6 years with them at the time doing that, inventing things, working on various technology projects. And then in 2007, the owner approached me and said, you know, we'd like the work that you've done, but we would like to help you expand your business skills. So they made an offer for me to go back to Georgetown University to get a master's in leadership. So again, now my journey's taking another pivot. And I really kind of took a step back and I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life? I was an architect, technology. I'm going to Georgetown for leadership at the McDonough School of Business. But then I remembered, I had told myself something when I was in graduate school, and it was just stay open to the journey, right? Stay open to the journey. So I went back to school, I got in. Fortunately, I got in, went through the program, incredible experience. And while I'm at Georgetown, I realized something, that as all the teachers, all the professors were showing what their areas of expertise were, teaching us their areas of expertise, strategy, communications, human resources, organizational culture, I realized that to me, it was a kit of parts that was building something. So it really struck a chord that, hey, organizations, they're like buildings. They consist of various components, and if you can put the parts together in such a way, you can achieve a desired outcome or goal, a vision. So there's where I came up with the idea of like, well, you know what I am? I'm really an organizational architect.
So you mentioned blueprint a lot in your life, right? When you went to school, you had to learn that. You also had a lot of careers, and you had to use your architectural skills and knowledge, and the blueprint continues to come up. In your everyday experience with businesses, entrepreneurship, and when you're working on planning for your business, right? We're going to go into also the business of your branding and marketing, Zatori, in a second. But how does your brain work? Because you naturally create blueprints in your brain all the time. It just kind of came with you. And do you teach that? How do you use blueprints to map out what the organization is going to look like, the direction of your organization? I'd like to talk about that because it's such an interesting concept, right? To take something that you've learned and use it in your everyday experience as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. I would say that, my brain is always doing that. I think a lot of architects do that. We see things in their component parts, and then we figure out ways of assembling those things towards desired outcomes or goals. So in terms of business, yes, I can talk to someone as an example and just ask them, what are you trying to do? What do you want to do with the business? It could be anything from revenues to just a purpose that they want to achieve, a culture, something. And then with my understanding of both architecture and how organizations are designed and built, I can take the part, put it into its component pieces and help them see where things are not aligning or coming together. So as an example, when you're building a building, there's a foundation, there's a structure, there's systems inside of it, there's a skin. So there's a very linear sequence. So with a business, as an example, if the business is not yielding the outcomes that you want to see, something there is not either developed or working with everything else. So a big part of the work that I currently do is helping people understand the foundation, which to me is the purpose, the values. If you don't understand that, your building is sitting on top of a foundation that may not be supporting what it is that you're really trying to create. But yeah, it's basically just writing it out on paper. Some of the work that I help people do around personal branding, same thing. Let's take you apart. What are your interests? What are you excited about? What are your skills? What have you done? And put it all down on paper. Architects are always drawing.
Now let's go back for a second. You were working for a firm for 6 years, and then you had a moment when you decided, what's the direction now? Because you're all about going on this journey, right? You're curious, you try it, and then with this particular case, you were there for 6 years. At some point, you decided, okay, it was time to pivot, time to make a change. How did Zatori get uncovered by you in terms of launching it?
Well, I was there for 10 years.
10 years,
After
okay.
6 years is when I got introduced, well, 7 years, I got introduced to the Georgetown leadership program. And then when I went back to the organization, I worked with the owners and the company as a whole on how do we, what we were really trying to do was how did we institutionalize a culture of innovation? So they were high-tech product development working at an accelerated pace, which means they had to get things done really quickly. So there was a certain culture that needed to support that activity, getting those things done. So my role at the time was really working with ownership and the team as a whole on ways of helping people become more innovative through their leadership or day-to-day practices. So I did that for about 3 years. During that time, the company was also working to take one of the technologies that they had developed in-house and commercialize it, get it out to market. So they, for most of the time that I was there, they were helping others create products. And towards the end there, before I left, they started to create their own products. And what happened during that time was I had been there for 10 years, and it was a really, really great experience. But I took a step back, and I was like, well, where's the journey leading me next? Because something inside of me was saying, hey, there's still something out there. My instincts were talking to me saying that there's something else. So in 2011, our fourth child, my daughter, Grace, was born. And for whatever reasons, you know, when you're going through change, you figure, hey, if I'm going through a dramatic change, I might as well just change a lot of things in one shot. So I really just had this idea of what would it look like if I were to step out and try to do my own thing? And if I did, what would I do? And during that time, I was working with a branding and marketing consultant on that new company, that new technology company that we had set up. And I saw what she did, and I really enjoyed it. And it made a lot of sense to me because part of the work that I had done for the last 10 years at the company that I was at was really branding and marketing. It was everything about getting us out into the community, working with the CEO on communications. And I really started to look at what she was doing and what I was doing, and I was like, I can do that. So that's when I made the decision to step out and start Zatori, branding and marketing. And the idea then was to really help organizations understand their blueprint, and then how does all of that manifest in the brand, in the marketing, their website, their messaging. And that's what I started to do with Zatori in 2011.
Now I'm curious, what does Zatori, how did that name come about?
Zatori is actually, it's a Zen Buddhist concept for a sudden flash of awareness or insight. We call it aha. That's what I do. So I noticed that since I was a kid, I've actually been branding. I used to nickname all my friends. I would literally, all of them have nicknames. So I've always been into branding. And I think part of it is because the ability to see things in their component parts and then give them kind of like a label.
Right, exactly.
Right? What's the unspoken personality? What are all the intangibles? My brain somehow sees that, and I can say, well, it should be called this. If that were to transmute onto paper, the colors should be like this. If you were to communicate this to others, you could say this.
Right. Now, do you think that's more skill that's been developed or more intuition and a combination?
Combination, yeah. It's the intuition, because I can almost see the thing 10 years down the road. And then the other side of it's just the skill, the practicality of the reason that you do the blueprint is because you still need to get things on paper and to justify that brand or whatever you think it should be.
Now, what do you love most about the marketing and branding work that you're doing today? The ahas, you know, namesake is Zatori, right? So a lot of ahas happen when you're working with individuals and corporations and institutions. But what's your most fun or memorable experience when one of your clients have had an aha around branding and marketing?
I think it's when I sometimes do brand refreshes and help my client see themselves in a new light. And they see it and they're like, wow, that's me. And then what's really exciting to see is that after their brand, their messaging, their communication is on paper, over time as they start to embody it, and I talk to them 6 months, 12 months down the road, and they have become that because now they're believing it for themselves. And then also the results, of course. So they start to achieve the results that they were shooting for in the past, but maybe not hitting. But all of a sudden, because they're clear about who they are, what they do, how they deliver it, they're congruent, they really just show up as a different person. They embody the brand that we've created, and then I can concretely see it in the results.
Okay, so when is it appropriate for someone to consider a brand refresh, and what is a brand refresh from your perspective?
So a brand refresh is just, I think we're always constantly reinventing ourselves. So a brand refresh could just be re-examining why you started whatever it is that you're doing, to find the passion again, right? It could also just be maybe it's time for a fresh identity. You just want to see something different. Maybe there's been enough change between the time that you started whatever it is that you're doing till now that you're just not that anymore. So now you've evolved into a new identity. And it's usually a brand refresh. It's usually more of an evolution. It's not like anything was wrong. It's just how do we build on what was great for that time and place when you did that, and who are you currently?
It's a perfect setup for reinventions and evolution, because I also want to talk about this next phase or this next evolution of you and Zatori. You're doing some more work. You've been focusing on branding and marketing for several years now, and now you've kind of moved toward your executive leadership role again, correct? So let's talk about that. What are some of the upcoming things that you're excited about and around leadership? And I know you're in partnership with Myron Radio. I know we want to talk about that. Can you kind of help us understand, you've been doing this, you're successful, you do it well, and then now you're stepping in to do new projects. Why is that important for you to continue evolving?
Let me backtrack. So right before I left my previous organization, I had been introduced to Myron Radio through a mutual friend. And I had invited Myron out to the company when I was still working there to see if we could maybe do something with him. And the work that Myron did really struck a chord with me, because he works with executive development, executive coaching, leadership development, but on a very practical, results-oriented side. Okay, so he met with me, gave me an assessment called the Trimetrics, met with me again, gave me the results of the Trimetrics, which I think everybody should do, because it's really like doing diagnostics on yourself, okay? But here's what happened. Here's really where it struck a chord for me. As he's giving me the results, he's asking me, Bryan, are you thinking about this right now? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, are you maybe contemplating doing this? I was like, yeah. And he just kept me, I thought he was looking into a crystal ball. And he was just like, no, Bryan, it's just the patterns. He goes, I've done this enough times that I can tell where you are, and then what the analytics, what the diagnostics are telling me about you is that you have certain energy patterns in terms of, there are certain things that you do when you're really at your highest energy, and I can sense that you're going through some kind of change. Something's changing for you here, right? So what Myron indirectly helped me realize was that he was part of the catalyst that gave me the courage to want to step out and say, well, maybe it is time to do something different, something new. So that's how my relationship with Myron started. So when I stepped out to start Zatori, I called Myron, and I was like, dude, can we just meet? And at the time, Myron was actually reevaluating what he'd been doing for so many years. And he contracted me to help him with his brand, refresh the website a bit, kind of rethink through his own purpose and where he was at. And we just had a really good chemistry from day one, I would say. And we just kept talking, and we started thinking, we should really try to figure out how we can do something together. So literally we've been talking now 3 years about this, and 2 years ago we said, why don't we combine our expertise? So Myron sat with me one day and he said, look, this is what I would like to do. Develop a curriculum based on the work that I've done with over 5,000 executive or leadership coaching sessions. I really just want to focus on the content, the curriculum, that side of the equation. I was like, perfect, because I'm into branding and marketing, and I really want to focus on that and the technology. How do we create something unique? So for about the last 2 years, Myron and I have just gone back and forth, and finally, about 6 months ago, we came across a gentleman by the name of Brendon Burchard, who does a training called Total Product Blueprint. It's how to monetize your expertise. that program dramatically changed our lives in terms of what we were doing. And quick note, how that showed up and how the journey just continues to unfold. A friend of mine, January, shows up at our home one day to meet with my wife and me just to hang out. And she mentions that she's doing this total product blueprint program by Brendan Burchard, but it's like a $2,000 program. So at the time we were looking at it, but we're like, do we really want to commit $2,000 to like an online development program? And something about that conversation with her got me thinking, this may be the next step. So I presented it to Myron and he was just like, yeah, let's do it. And that radically changed the speed at which we were doing what we were doing. So fast forward to today, where we are right now is we've started a company called Pivotal Leadership. And the focus is going to be ultimately on a series or multiple programs that either we create or we can publish other experts, but really focus in the area of leadership. So this first program that we've created is called A Leader's Journey. And what it specifically is aimed to do is to take somebody who is a new or an emerging leader and to accelerate their development so that they can start to show up as a leader within their organization much quicker. So it's based on the work that Myron is doing with Fortune 500 companies in this area. And then the idea is really that they could spend 10 years trying to figure all this stuff out, hire somebody like Myron, or go through this online program and get a jump start in their leadership career.
And your role in that relationship right now, and how do you see your role in the future? Do you guys plan on consulting and going out there, or focusing on really building the content, selling the program, and then also consulting as well? What's your vision for it?
Well, my current role is, Myron and I said, we've committed to building an organization around this. Ultimately, we would like to put people in the leadership roles.
Okay.
So I've taken on Chief Marketing Officer and Technical Director. Myron is going to currently take the role of the CEO and lead curriculum program developer. So initially, we need to get this prototype built because this is going to set the stage for all the other products that we can launch. But the idea is, yes, ultimately what we can do is maybe blend consulting with the program. We're looking at in the future probably creating seminars around it, licensing the program to other corporate training entities. And then we've just got a lot of things that we can do with it. But Myron is a very results and focused individual. So it's great because we have these great brainstorms and then we'll just ask, well, what can we do now? What would create maximum value for others right now? So I think it's really been great that Myron's come into my life. It's almost like a yin and yang relationship.
That's great.
You know?
Well, that also helps us kind of stretch our limits around entrepreneurship too, because for many entrepreneurs that kind of start out on their own, they feel isolated. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, small and growing entrepreneurs, and that's the one thing is, I'm doing all this great work. I think I'm doing a great work, and I have lots of clients, but I'm all alone. I spend a lot of time in my head, I spend a lot of time in my home office, and I love encouraging people to partner up and collaborate. It doesn't necessarily mean that you end up doing a business together, but in your case, that's powerful that you ended up deciding to do that. But I'd love to talk more about that whole concept of how has collaborating with Myron, or just that concept of working with somebody else and partnering with somebody else, changed the way that you run your business? Because for me, I know for sure when I'm in partnership with someone or I'm collaborating on a project, I got to step up my game. There's something about being accountable. Would you agree?
Oh, yes. Definitely the accountability piece is there. You're committed. So I tell Myron I'm going to do something. I've got to get it done. But then the other side of this is just the complementary skill set, where initially Myron, it's extraordinary that I'm working with somebody that has the insight and wisdom that Myron has, because he looked at our trimetrics, our diagnostics, and put them up side by side, and we could see where we would excel, where the pitfalls were, what roles would be more optimal. So it's great because Myron, I can always tell, he's always trying to work to keep me in my high energy zone, and then I try to do the same thing for him. So definitely, having done many, many things on my own, I would say that doing it this time with a partner really just accelerates things. And also it just gives you somebody to talk through it. And there's also that side of it, but then there's a personal side. So there are moments where I'm like, Myron, I'm just a little bit stressed about this, trying to figure this out. And he can walk me through that, right? And just like in 2 minutes, things clear up. We've had moments where when we were trying to put this program together, things were just not coming into alignment. And Myron could say, okay, let's take a pause here. Let's take a time out. Let's reset. He calls it like a mental reboot. And he brings out his whiteboard and just helps me see things through a whole different lens. We come up with an action plan, and then I'm like, okay, I know what I need to do next. So as somebody who has a very creative mind, when I get into that creative flow, I'm not always thinking in a linear sequence anymore. And Myron helps me stay on track. And then the other way around, too. I can share things with Myron. And Myron's a very creative individual as well. So I can share things with him and say, Myron, what do you think about this? And it's just this great kind of back and forth, yin and yang relationship. And what I've noticed is that what we're creating is that much more powerful because we've really come into a mastermind with each other. So if you're an entrepreneur, even if you're going it alone, trying to make it happen, I think you should do that because that's part of your own personal growth. But even if you cannot find a business partner, collaborating, getting into a mastermind with others is very important to keep you accountable, but also to keep you inspired.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great kind of step to the next question is, how do you find people that will inspire you or things and continue to kind of elevate? Because, you know, when you're in the midst of running a business and it gets to a point where it is successful, but, you know, there's also this chance of it plateauing as well, right? I mean, that happens a lot. You kind of go up like this, you might come down, and then you go up again, and then it just kind of plateaus. And the thing about plateauing is wonderful because you have some stability in your business and being able to have a product or a service that has a reputation that will sustain itself. But how do you keep yourself as a leader, just like you know, being curious and being a creative entrepreneur? It's always about, okay, what's next? What's the next step? How do you balance that? How do you balance kind of holding still and honoring what's really working and versus abandoning it because something shiny and new is coming around the corner? You know, so talk a little bit about that, because I think for me, I used to struggle with that a lot, being able to have this great idea come up or a new opportunity come up, and I had to really pull back and look at my map, you know, the vision and mission map that I work on, is being able to look at that map and say, am I on course with my true north, with my vision and mission for my business? And that brings me back. How do you guys do that?
Well, I think part of it is that Myron is he'll tell you, I mean, the name of his current company is the R Group, where the R stands for results. Very results focused, that's how his brain works. Always moving towards desired outcome or goals. So having him working with me keeps me doing the same thing, and I appreciate it because I'm seeing things get done. Now, in terms of how do I balance that against kind of staying true to my sometimes more nonlinear self, this is what I do. Like you said, have your vision, your blueprint, you're moving towards that true north. But then give yourself the dream time, because that's where stuff comes up. So I'll maybe allocate an hour or just time where I'm like, this is just me doing whatever it is that I want to do. I have many other interests. I have kids, so you know, I've got 4 kids. So I've got to build in the time just to be there, be creative, be non-linear. The way to keep that under wraps, so is to just be clear about it. It can't be all the time, because you do have to be moving towards something. But yeah, and I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do this. You just have to find something that works for you. And for me, it's just being conscious about my dream time. You know, when am I going to? And as things come up, what I do, I keep it. My sister and I actually, we're keeping this thing we call the idea book. So I'll send her a note and saying, hey, not now, put it in the idea book. I think it's more like a folder in our email system. In the future, you know, let's go back and look at it. So, but right now, what are we trying to accomplish? But it doesn't mean to lose sight of all these other great visions or ideas that you can have.
Now, I also want to talk about the life outside of the business. Right now, you're basically running 2 businesses. In the process of setting up this new business, a lot of work goes into that. But you have 4 beautiful children. You have an amazingly beautiful and kind wife. How do you balance that as well? Like, do you guys actually plan family time? Do you have something written on your schedule? Or is it, like you said, dream time and just kind of go with it? Whatever the kids want to do, you talk about it and you do it. Because that really is something that is critical for entrepreneurs and business owners and executives. Mm-hmm. Because there's this need to provide for the family. So that means work, work, work. But providing for the family is also being present.
Yeah.
Being
Yeah.
there and having all those opportunities that you'll miss one day if you're working all the time. So I just want to get your perspective, because you are a father, you are a husband, and you have two businesses going on right now.
I don't think there's a clear answer to that. And I would tell you that in my own life, I've struggled with it. How do I make sure that I'm there for my kids, there for my business partner, there for myself, there for everything else that I need to get done? And when I start to feel uneasy about it, here's what I remind myself. Wherever I'm at, just be as present as possible in that moment, right? So when I'm with my kids, really try to be there, be there totally, not have my mind elsewhere. And then when I'm doing whatever it is I'm doing in terms of the business, I need to be there, I need to be present. And then also look for creative ways of integrating everything together. So as an example, we built a video studio in my basement for this program that we're working on. So I had my sons help me build it out. So I've got pictures of them because I wanted them to see this is how you make something happen. It takes a lot of time, effort, but they participated in that. So now my son sees us shooting videos, and the other day he wanted to stay with me and watch us shoot the videos. And then the other day he's watching me edit the videos. And he's like, Dad, can you show me how that works? And I'm like, yeah, try to integrate them into it. Where I think in the past, it was very easy to segment your personal and your professional life. I think now it's become a little bit more blended. But the thing with me, the thing that, like, my own struggle with it is, like, when I'm in that creative flow, I'm so in there that I can't even talk to anybody, literally. Right. And I'm just like, my mind is just so there. So that's where I try to, and I'll explain that to them. I'm like, I tell my kids, when Daddy's doing this, Daddy's really into it, but I want you to do the same thing as you grow up. So whatever it is that you do with your life, I want you to, whatever it is that you want to do or decide to do, really pour yourself into it. So I've been looking for creative ways of bringing all of that together. And I think part of it is just also letting go that you can't be everything at all times. So at times I'm like, oh, I feel bad I'm not hanging out with the kids. I'm like, well, I got to let that judgment go, because really I'm doing the best that I can. And I think it's just more a matter of staying present in the moment wherever you're at, disconnecting from everything else.
I'm just going to stay on the kids for a little longer, because I think that especially with the youth, how do we inspire them to stay innovative and creative, and just what you share, the example of bringing them on board and helping them see that there's something that they can create and make happen on their own, and kind of being the example, right? When you're out there kind of working with these leaders, and to me, we're all just young, inner children inside. We're just in adult bodies now. I mean, I find this to be the case when I look at my nephews and they're talking very creatively and just completely open and expressing themselves. I laugh a lot, because I always wish that the leaders in our organizations, or the people that I work with, or those that come through my retreats, have the same desire to just be expressive and to say what's on their mind and to truly be authentic in that moment and present. And I just wonder, because you're in marketing and branding and you work with leaders, do you find that to be a struggle when you're trying to pull so much out of them? And how often does that inner child, because when you talked about your children, it reminded me of working with my clients, and a lot of times I see that spark, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's the inner child that wants to come out and play again, that wants to be the kind of leader that's very real and honest, and bring all of them back into the picture. Do you see that happening, and how does that play into your role in the training for leaders? Do you inspire that in them again?
Yeah, part of the work that I do on the branding side is I actually have a specific methodology where I can take individuals essentially on a regression to go back to, and it's interesting when I take them on this regression and we go all the way back to when they were kids, what was important to them, what do they love to do, and when you fast forward to who they are today, you can see that they've been on this journey to become who they are. But the other thing that I try to do is that I try to meet people where they are. So individuals in leadership positions, the research, and if you look at a lot of the assessments, there is a particular mindset to individuals who want to lead others, right? And a lot of the time it's results oriented. They want to create distinction in some way or fashion. So they have a focus around what they do. Now, I think what you're asking is, how do you bring out the childlike, not the childlike, but the childhood qualities of when they loved what they were doing? And I think we can do that by getting them to really reflect on the purpose. So if I go back and ask an entrepreneur or a business owner or a leader, when you first got into doing what you were doing, why did you decide to do that, right? Because over time, I'm pretty sure it's become a lot more structured, and there's systems around you, and there's ways of how you're doing things. But when you first got into this, none of that existed. It was really just a vision. So how do we get back to that? And then if we can go back a little bit further, when you were a teenager or in college, what were your interests? Why were you trying to do that? And then when you were a kid, you know, and some of the CEOs that I've worked with, they'll go back and remember that when they were a child, they just had this innate sense that they wanted to be free, right? So they've essentially created their path. They've created their own journey. That's why they lead, because they have this sense that they want to create, to feel that sense of freedom and to create that for others. But it really depends. I really work with leaders to just understand where all that comes from. And then we can look at ways of, well, how can we express that even more? In my area right now is messaging and communication. So it's not so much telling them how to be with people, but if you were to write this out, right? What is your story? What's your organizational story? How do you weave into that? And then what I think happens is when you reconnect them with that, they start to show up that way again, right? And they start to remember, this is why I did this to begin with. And there's usually something they were excited or passionate about. Because if you talk to most leaders, even myself, if you really were to tell somebody what they're going to go through to get what they want, nobody would do it. It's really hard. I mean, you're there, we're there. We know how difficult it is. So you really got to just get back to that place of why. Why did you want to do this to begin with? What were you excited about?
So, you know, I'd love for you to share some advice also when you're talking to a leader and you're talking about having them step into their personal brand, because it's really, in essence, you're kind of putting this two world together, right? Your business background in leadership, developing leaders, and then also your background in marketing, and this architect in you that wants to build and organize things and people. How do you inspire a leader to truly own their personal brand? You know, because it's one thing to brand an organization, it's one thing to come up with a tagline or a messaging for an organization or institution. It's another to call out a leader or a business owner or CEO and say, okay, on top of branding your organization, who are you? And who are you as a leader? Do you do a lot of that personal one-on-one work as well as you're going through the branding?
You know what, it's interwoven into the work that I'm doing, but my recommendation would actually be this. I can really help individuals get all of this on paper, okay? Blueprint it. Who are you? At that point, the ongoing work is really a coach. Okay, somebody can actually take the branding and marketing, the personal branding, and here's what happens. I'm calling an organization and the leader who started it, their branding are so interwoven that it's almost one and the same, right? So a coach could take that information, and Myron and I have talked about this, and say, oh wow, this is really what's important to you. This is who you are based on where you've come from and where you are today. So I would recommend to get a coach, a good coach that you could show this to, and then do some more formal diagnostics and assessments. So that's what the work that Myron does. Do something to really get a bigger understanding now that you understand your purpose. And then you can start looking and like the work that you do as well. How can you now do things to step into that brand? Because the brand is you. It's always been you. You're just at a point now where maybe it's time to really exemplify that even more. And when I see leaders do this, I mean, really, that's where they become what I call like a transcendent leader. They're at their most powerful. They really step up when they do that, and people start to feel that. You know, when you meet a leader that's really stepped into who they are, they own it, and they're very clear about it. And they're very clear not just about who they are, but what value they have to bring to others. Because a leader really ultimately understands it. They crafted a vision, but the whole idea is to mobilize and inspire people to realize that. So when they become clear, everything around them starts to become clear as well. So quick, short answer is I would recommend working with a coach.
So now I want to talk about the next evolution of you. Okay, you've shared that you're working on this project and this new business now. But what's your vision for yourself? Because you are constantly looking and you're very curious, you're constantly learning. I've known you for a couple years now, and every time you send me information, it's always profound things that really take your mind and expand your mind and sees other possibilities. I want to talk a little bit about how your brain works, because I feel like the work that you do with leaders is about that, helping people expand their perspective and horizon. For you, how do you continue to learn and grow? What kind of mediums do you use? Who do you follow? Where do you get all this information so that you can continue to stay connected and move forward?
Well, right now my focus is really to pivotal leadership with Myron. That's number one. Really solidifying this, getting a base under it, because like I mentioned, so Myron and I will take these executive roles within the organization, but we're already entertaining individuals that we could work with that could step into those roles for us 12 months, year and a half down the road. So I really just want to run this ball for the moment. And I love that Myron has come into my life and that I'm now seeing things and doing things through that results focus. So I really want to embody this, step into that presence for a while. If I were to look out even beyond that, I definitely see myself as an educator and a continuous learner. So years back, I'd been looking at a doctorate program. So at some point, I'd like to get back to that. Just my own personal journey of discovery and learning. I love learning. And then Myron and I have actually talked about a couple of other things, ideas that he has, ideas that I have. So I think it's really looking at those couple years down the road and saying, what would we like to do next? But for the moment, I really want to shore up pivotal leadership, and then start to build that out as an organization.
So any words of wisdom for those entrepreneurs out there who are really taking a look at where they are right now and not necessarily knowing where they want to go, but are curious to find out? Because you've been there a couple times. You got to a place inside, deep down in your intuition, you said, I feel like there's something more out there. What if somebody's out there now with their business and sitting there saying, I don't quite know what's out there for me, and they don't have that matrix box staring at them, but they're watching this and they see you? What would be some advice for them? Like, what do they do at that point when they're kind of wondering what's next?
Let me talk about the entrepreneur journey really quick, because I think number one is you need to understand how that process plays out. And I've studied entrepreneurs all my life, or successful people, peak performance. You've got an idea here as a starting point, and here it is realized. The in-between, the process, that's where the magic happens, because the reality of doing whatever it is that you want to do, it's actually not about the outcome, it's about who you become in the process. So one, with that understanding, I think for me, that helped alleviate a lot of the pressures of like, I need to be doing this thing specifically for this desired outcome. I was killing myself with that for a while. When I really realized, no, it's who I'm becoming in the process that's important. Okay. Now, with that said, the brain works by moving towards things that you've either envisioned or you can imagine, right? So use the power of your imagination to be as clear as you can about this thing that you want to create out into the future, right? And then also force yourself to be tactical and results-oriented and think about, okay, if this is the outcome that I want, what do I need to do today to start moving me towards that? Now, on the more holistic side of all of this, I would say get some development. Maybe a Tony Robbins, maybe take our program, or a Leader's Journey, Pivotal Leadership Program. You definitely have got to equip yourself with the mindset and the skills to go on the journey, okay? Now, here's the piece of it that I've never seen anybody dodge: the struggle, okay? And I was really reflecting on, why is it such a struggle to do this? The struggle, at least for me, what I'm coming to understand is that your mind has been conditioned a certain way, and who you are going to be when that vision is realized is not who you are today. So the mind needs to shift. That's the pain and the struggle that you feel along the journey. So with all of these things, the best recommendation action I can make is something a dear friend and mentor told me a couple years back. I said, what do I do? How do I do this? He's like, Bryan, decide what you want to do and then wake up every day and go do it.
Yeah, that's
So I would say
it's very much action based too. You know, it's not just having the dream, but basically being able to wake up every morning and saying, working toward that. And for me, the lesson for me was, what's the one thing that I want to accomplish today, and just kind of focus on that one thing. And then I end up doing more than that one thing. But instead of saying the 10 or 15 things on my list, and then I get so disappointed when I didn't get them all accomplished, I'll say, what's the one major thing I need to accomplish? So that's a really great and valid point that you make there. I'd love to learn more about how I'd love them to learn actually how they can reach you, and what's the best way for them to learn more about your business, both your businesses, and follow you.
And it's pivotleads.com. And you can email me, bramos@pivotleads.com.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. I could sit here and talk to you forever about entrepreneurship and leadership, but thank you for all of your insight and your words of wisdom for our audience today.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I look forward to seeing you next time on Tea with Mully.